This morning I want to share something with you that has been moving through my heart and mind for a while now. I just haven't been sure how to approach it. So we'll just do a little bite-sized piece today. Obviously our world is very polarized and very crazy now. And the first thing I want to say is you cannot vote yourself out of a broken and corrupted system. But you can awaken and remember who you are and what you're here for. And that makes a huge difference, way more difference than voting harder. What I also want to talk about is the teachings of Christ. Now, I grew up in the church, very much in a practicing church-going Christian family. I am not religious. I am very spiritual, and I know there are people who would judge me for just saying that. I can't do anything about that. But as I got into my journal this morning, I started really being reminded that the teachings of Christ are very multi-layered, multidimensional, encoded with so much meaning, so many layers, we can't even count how many layers. The teachings are alive and vibrant, and they're also encrypted. Like, those who are meant to understand will understand certain things, and those who are not meant to will not understand certain things. What I also realized is that the keys, the encryption keys, if you will, to decode the meanings don't exist here. And I would say probably a lot of theologians and seminarians and spiritual teachers probably don't hold many of those decoding encryption keys, because the keys are not up here, they are in here. This is where we discern the real meaning in real life situations for what those teachings mean. And I would also say that the teachings of Christ are not the only teachings and writings that exist that carry this encryption and these multi-layers of meanings. But they're the ones I'm most familiar with because it's what I grew up with. And I can still sense the power in that. I want to start with a topic that's very, maybe controversial, but also very powerful. Growing up in the church, the topic of sin is bantered about a lot. And Jesus talked about sin. But sin is a matter of how you define it and look at it. It could be simple enough to say that sin is about following the 10 Commandments and not breaking them. And if you break one of the 10 Commandments, you are sinning. And there's nothing wrong with the 10 Commandments. They're a great framework, a great starting point, a great structure. But there's a huge difference between someone who does paint by numbers and a true artist. For the paint by numbers, any of us, I'm not such an artist. You, me, any of us could probably sit down and figure out a paint by numbers. But for a true artist, the art moves through, flows through from the heart, from the soul, through the artist to the canvas or whatever medium they happen to be working in. And it's the same way with spirituality. I knew a lot of people who followed the rules, kept the rules growing up, but never quite got it in here. They were in church every Sunday and gave their money to the church and, followed the rules really well and really at the surface seemed to be doing all the right things, but never quite got it in here. And I think those teachings are so important because if you can decode within here some of what Christ was teaching, you can understand the deeper layers and the deeper meanings. It's not about up here, it's about here. It's not to say that the 10 Commandments are wrong or that, if you go murder someone, there aren't consequences. Of course there are consequences, But there is a huge difference between having it all right up here and living from here. And I think a big, huge overarching theme in what Jesus was trying to teach us was about living from here. Living from here. Responding to people from here. Responding to God, the divine, from in here. Feeling, knowing, sensing the divine from in here. He was way more about this than about this. I think there's so many examples of that. I do want to kind of boil down my multi-layered, multi-dimensional understanding of sin. When I read the teachings of Jesus, sin does not come across to me as, you broke this commandment, you did this bad thing. To me, sin is really, when he's talking about sin, when I listen and hear, I sense that he's saying anything that causes you to feel cut off from who you truly are as a soul being, and anything that causes you to forget what you came here for, which was your soul purpose, your dharmic path, what you came here to be and do at the soul spirit level. Anything that causes you to forget that or feel cut off from God, that is what sin really is. It's less about what you do or don't do, and it's more about what causes you to be cut off from those truths, those real truths. So when I read about sin in that context, it's less about finger pointing and judging and shame and guilt, the very things that caused you to feel cut off from the divine, cut off from your purpose. And it's more about mindset shift. If it's guilt that causes you to feel cut off, it's about clearing the guilt. If it's shame that you're carrying, it's about detoxing and releasing that shame. If it's anger or self-doubt or any of those things, those are the things that cause us to feel cut off. That is what sin truly is in the spiritual meaning, from the best I can understand it through here. And so I see that there are a lot of church leaders, spiritual leaders that use sin as a guilt and shame and manipulation control tool. And then I look at the teachings of Jesus and I see how he was very hypercritical of the religious leaders of his day, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, for being so legalistic and just layering heaps and heaps and heaps of heavy, burdensome things onto the backs of the people, rather than empowering, liberating, setting them free. And I think he was all about the empowering, the liberation, and the setting free. So it's not that there aren't bad things we can do, and it's not that there aren't consequences for bad things. But when he's talking about sin, he's not talking about, did you steal, did you lie, did you lust, as much as he is talking about, what is your mindset? Does it allow you to remember who you are as a soul being and feel that divine connection, or does it cut you off from that? Sin is way more about the separation, probably both in the mind and the heart, than it is about what you do or don't do. I think that's enough for today. I really want to share more of these teachings. They've been so profound. And when I look at these teachings, and again, there are other spiritual writers and teachers throughout time who have brought these encoded kind of messages. But the one that has always resonated with me the most, even since early childhood, I could sense the energy, the power in these teachings, is the teachings of Christ. That's what I grew up with. And when we pull all the dogma off and all the heaps of spiritual, not even spiritual, religious stuff off of them, the depth and the power in those teachings and the layers are so profound. And one teaching of Christ could mean one thing to you at one point in your life and could have such a different meaning to you. That same passage of words could have such a completely different meaning to you at a different stage in your life, because it's living and dynamic, and because the decryption keys are right here. They're in here. The way to discern and understand, it's in here. So, if this was helpful, I'd like to be sharing more of this over time. Much peace to you, much empowerment to you, and liberation. The teachings were not about enslavement. Those of us who feel anger or hurt towards the church, it's time to decouple the human things thrown over the top of the words of Christ from the actual encrypted, encoded meaning and message that can only be sensed from here. Hopefully I'll come back with more of this. Until next time.